Welcome everyone to another Code Doge video. Today we tackle the subject matter of ARM templates. There are essentially two routes to ARM templates, one of which is through PowerShell and the second being through Azure CLI. This particular video is going to be using PowerShell with a video on Azure CLI to follow sometime in the future. So now before we begin, another announcement. As always, the video description has all the important timestamps and links, including GitHub links, so feel free to pause the video at any time to take a look at the information. Okay, so before we begin coding, let's make sure to take some prerequisites into consideration. First and foremost, make sure you have a code IDE. I highly recommend Visual Studio Code, as that's what I'm going to be using throughout the video. Second, as I mentioned, there's two routes to go about using Azure PowerShell module or Azure CLI. I recommend that you install both of them so that you're ready for future videos. And on that logic, if you're using Azure PowerShell, I highly recommend that you install PowerShell 7.x because there's some integration features that's available in 7.x that's not there for PowerShell 5.x. And finally, with the Visual Studio Code installation, I recommend that you install the Resource Manager Tools extension from the marketplace. Okay, so now we're ready to begin. So let's start by going to Visual Studio Code and going to the folder of your choice. In this case, I happen to have a directory called PowerShell inside this YouTube repository. And we're just going to click on New File over here. And we can give it any name. In this case, I'm going to call it deployment rg.json. And there you go. We have a new JSON file. And now you can go to my YouTube link that's inside the video description, or you can pause it and type this out. But as you can see, let's zoom in here. We have this little snippet over here that we want to copy. And let's go right over here and just paste it right there. Now let's just finish laying this bracket out, save it, and we're good. So in case you're wondering what these three values mean, as you can see, this is straight from Microsoft's documentation itself. Schema specifies the location of the JSON schema. Content version specifies the version of the template. And resources is an empty container for all the resources you will eventually add to this template. So just a heads up, as you can see, this is going to be deploying no resources. It's simply just going to see if you can actually deploy a valid template. And then later in the video, we're going to go over how you can verify whether or not a deployment has gone through inside Azure Portal, as well as the logs itself. And then moving forward, from there, we will start to add resources and go a little bit deeper. Alright, so now that we have a template created, all we have to do now is actually sign in to Azure from a PowerShell instance so that there's connectivity to our Azure portal and that we can actually deploy it. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up PowerShell and we're simply going to type in Connect-AzAccount, and a pop-up window will appear that will allow you to enter your credentials and make that connection. Alright, so let's navigate back to our Visual Studio Code, and in case you don't see this window because it's your first time, hover over here, click on New Terminal, and you will see that a PowerShell window has opened up here. So we have two sessions. I can close this other one. So from here, you can type in Connect-AzAccount. And a pop-up window should be opening. So it looks like for me, it opened up in another screen. This will be blurred out because I don't want you to see my credential set, but I did click on my account. As you can see, you'll see authentication complete. We can close this tab. And if you go back, we have made a connection here. Again, this will be blocked out, this account, but you can see the subscription name, the tenant ID. Alright, so if you happen to not have this PowerShell module installed and you don't know how to do it, go ahead and watch the video that's inside the video description where we go over installing the prerequisites. So another thing I want to bring your attention to is if we look inside Azure Portal, we can see that I actually happen to have two subscriptions here. And since the resource group deployments and all the resources for that resource groups is tied to a subscription, you have to know which subscription you want to target, right? So I'll show you how to do that. So if we go back to this window and we see that we have the subscription name, we see that by default it's chosen one of them. So what we want to do, I'm going to clear this out. We're just going to type Get-AzSubscription. And if we type that out, we will see that it lists both subscriptions. And now the next command is actually going to allow us to switch the context to which subscription we actually want to deploy our resource group and its resources to. So if we come back here, we see that the first subscription's name is Microsoft Partner Network, and the second one is Pay As You Go. So let's go ahead and clear this out. And what we're going to do, say for example that we wanted to target the other one, we're going to type Set-AzContext and then the subscription name, which in this case is Pay As You Go. And now you can see that the context is Pay As You Go subscription, not the Microsoft Partnership Network subscription. Okay, so while the camera was off, I switched the context back to the Microsoft Partnership subscription because that's what I'm going to be using. And in case you don't believe me, what you can type to see which context you're currently under, you can type in Get-AzContext. And if you type that out, as you can see, the name of the subscription that we're currently under is Microsoft Partner Network. So now that we have all of that set up, we can actually create the resource group. In the event that you already have a resource group, you can go ahead and skip this or look at the video description to see how far you need to go to skip ahead. And in case you're not familiar with a resource groups are essentially a logical container of resources that is going to define your product or project in this case. So case in point, you might have a website and it might have SQL and Azure App Service. So your resource group might have SQL and Azure App Service. All right, so if we take a look at the PowerPoint, we see that we have a PowerShell command that we're going to use. This command is coming from the AZ module, so again, make sure you have that installed. And basically, it's new AZ resource group followed by the name of the resource group that you want to create, and then the location. The location is based on the geographical locations in the regions, such as America might have East US, East US 2, or West US. Europe might have EU. Japan might have JP, whatever, what have you. And in case you are wondering, here is a list of the geographical locations. This URL link will be inside the video description, but for quick reference, you can see that if we're inside the United States, for example, we have a couple locations. It may be Virginia, but it's actually called the region's called East US. So this is essentially what we're going to be passing, these region names over here. And if you're from another country, feel free to click on select geography and choose a country that makes sense for yourself, and you should be good to go. Okay, let's come back to Visual Studio Code so we can type that command in. Before we do that, if we hover over here, maximize, we can take the entire real estate over here, and now all we're going to do is type it out, new AZ resource group. If you hit tab, it should auto IntelliSense rather, and then you type in name, and let's just give it a simple name of test RG 2021 YouTube, right? And then the location, we're just going to type in East US. Okay. Okay, so we see that the provisioning state is as succeeded. The location is East US, and we've created the resource group with the resource group name that we wanted. And over here we have some information about the resource ID here. All right, so now if we navigate back to Azure Portal, we will see on the resource groups that we do indeed have the resource group created with the name that we passed, and it's under the subscription that we had under the current context. So if we were to actually click on this, we see a couple options open up on the tab. This in and of itself, going through all of this, is a whole nother topic in video, so maybe that's something in the future. But the key things is that the resource group has been created from that command, and obviously there's no resources in here. So there's one more thing I want to cover before we go on to the deployment of the empty template. If you hover over to deployments option under settings, you see that there's a deployment name as well as other info like the status, last modified, whatever, what have you. So the important thing here is that when we deploy the ARM template, we can actually give it a deployment name so that it's easier for tracking and logging in general. So now, as I stated, we are ready to deploy the actual template. And again, it will be an empty resource template. It's just to say that we simply deployed a template. So if we look under PowerShell, we see another command, which is new AZ resource group deployment, followed by the name of the deployment. As I mentioned, you can give it a name for easy logging and tracking. And then the resource group name, which is the one that we just created, or in this case, if you have a already existing one, pass that one. And then the name of, or the local path of your template file that we just created earlier in this video, which is essentially this one over here. Okay. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Under the terminal window, using PowerShell, we can start typing a new AZ resource group, deployment. If you hit tab, it'll use IntelliSense to fill it out. And then the name of the deployment, as I stated for tracking, will be initial deployment test, right? And then followed by your resource group name. If you hit tab, it autofills. So resource group name, I copied it over here, which is this. And then finally, the template file. Template file. So this is where you pass the actual location. So if you need help with that, you can just go over to the deployment file over here and type in reveal in File Explorer. We have this over here. Come back over here, paste it in, and then it's just called deployment rg.json. So that's our command. So sorry about this because I can't seem to figure out how to actually zoom inside the terminal window. I understand that this gray schema, font color schema, is not the best for a video. So in case you can't see what I typed in or you can't hear what I'm saying, it's saying new AZ resource group deployment hyphen name followed by the name of the deployment and then resource group name followed by the name of your resource group followed by hyphen template file, which is followed by the path of your deployment template file that we created earlier in the video. So, you can pause it here and just match it up to what makes sense for your project as you're following along. Okay, so now that we're back here, let's go ahead and enter. And it looks like it's comparing against the regex, and I'm assuming it's complaining about the fact that we have spaces. So let me go ahead and try this. Well, it's taking a while. So I think it's actually going to execute this time. Yep, it looks like that's the case. So we have a couple important things that come out from the log. We see again the deployment name that we passed, the resource group to verify, the provisioning state, which here we see is succeeded, which is great, gives a timestamp and some other info over here. So that's actually important because we now know how to verify just based off of the logs whether or not the resources have been provisioned properly. Okay, so now that we're back inside the Azure Portal window and we go back to deployments, if you hit refresh over here, you will now see that we do have a deployment that was successful, lightning fast because it deployed nothing, and it's unsuccessful again, and it has the deployment name. So if you click on it, had we actually deployed some resources on the deployment details, you can see that it would tell you what resources it was trying to deploy. All right, congratulations everyone. You have successfully deployed your first ARM template. Now let's get more in depth by adding a resource to deploy. But before we begin, If you're finding this video helpful, please do take the time to subscribe and like the video, and even leave a comment to help support the growth of the channel. More support equals more helpful videos, which equals more time we get to spend together. Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone has made sure to like and subscribe, and maybe even left a comment for me at this point, because there's no better way for me to understand that I'm doing a good job than for people to let me know that. And also give critiques. Feel free to give critiques so that I can improve. All right. So that being said, let us now minimize this terminal window once more so that we could look at our deployment rg.json file. And now we will actually create a resource inside this resources. Okay, so we can start by just doing a column, braces. And because we have that extension that I mentioned earlier installed, you see that we automatically have ARM resource options available to us via IntelliSense. Okay, FYI, in case you didn't follow along for the prerequisite video or you just happen to miss it, if you go to extensions inside Visual Studio Code and you expand this for a second, you will see we have installed Azure Resource Manager ARM Tools extension on the marketplace. And that's what I'm referring to. Once you have that available, you see those options that come up over here in terms of ARM resources. What's going on here? What the heck? Yep. So if you just type anything in, you see all of these potential options show up. Okay, so for the next part, you can either go to the GitHub link or you can pause the screen as I navigate to this over here. So there will be a GitHub link to this basic template that's given for adding a storage account, or you could just pause it. And if you're gonna pause it, let me just zoom in right here. Pause it right now. Okay, so otherwise I'm gonna type it out here, and I'm gonna try to explain very briefly as I type things out why I'm typing what I'm typing. All right, so we start by type. You see the IntelliSense already comes out, and over here we're gonna type in Microsoft dot storage / storage accounts, right? So obviously that's just dictating that yes, we're going to make a storage account for this resource. Next, we're going to determine the API version. Let's do that again. There you go. And in this case, we're going to use the most recent one. Thank God for IntelliSense from that market extension. The name we're going to provide over here. The template always says provide, something like provide unique name. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to say test storage account 2021, right? YouTube. And let's go back over here. Okay, so location, similar to the create Azure resource group, it's talking about the region. So in this case is East US we will use. And then the SKU. So the SKU is essentially, I'll show it in a second, right after I finish typing this block out. But it's essentially like the settings of your storage account. And in this case, I'm going to go down over here. Let's change the format here. Let's go over here and we'll give the name. And here we're going to type in standard LRS, local redundancy. And then the kind is, obviously what kind of provisioning. So in this case, storage v2. And for properties, and over here we will just have one property, support HTTP traffic only, and we will set that to be a default of true. And I think that's enough to get started. That looks similar to the template that we had as well. We had a quick little breakdown of everything as well. So real quick, in case you're wondering, we're looking at SKU types before for storage accounts. Here's the documentation link. It should be inside the video description. Otherwise, the GitHub will actually have it under its folder for this video. Okay, so quickly, you can just see the SKU types, LRS, local redundant, whatever would have you. Okay, so real quick, let's cover the 4 properties of a resource. Number 1 is the type of resource. Obviously, in this case, it's a storage account. Number 2 is the API version. Number 3 is the name of the resource. And number 4 is the location, which region you're going to deploy it to. And again, this screenshot, as well as other important files, such as text files with more links, are all inside the video description. All right, so now that we have the template updated to have a storage account as a resource, we can just simply type in the new AZ resource group. So let me make this simpler since I can't zoom in. We're going to use this command. So remember, we can't have any space, and the name of the deployment is going to be added storage account resource. The resource group is the same, and for this video example, yeah, we'll keep the same path as well. So I'm just going to copy this. You can feel free to pause the video and type it out, or just type it in yourself. But anyways, it's going to be a new AZ resource group deployment, name, added storage account resource, resource group, test RG 2021 YT, and template file, the path of your deployment RG. Okay, so we're good to go. Let's hit enter. It's taking some time to deploy.
A few minutes later.
There it is. So it's just taking a while to deploy.
A little later.
So if we come back to the portal, we see that 50 seconds has passed and it's still in the deploying state. And it looks like it failed. Why did it fail? Deployment details. How many is this? Test storage. I'm not going to count that. It's probably too long. I think that might be more than 24 characters. Lowercase letters only. That's the reason why I got caught up. Okay, so that's fine. Deployment failed because of that. And as we can see inside the log itself, it actually tells us that it's failed as well for a similar message. So let's go ahead and just change this up and make this all lowercase, 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 lowercase. Okay, I think we should be good to go. Let's clear this out and we'll try it again. So if we come to the portal, we see that after having changed the issue about the lowercase letters, that the deployment is now successful. Okay, so now that we have this successful deployment, let's go back to resource group and double check to see whether or not it's there. And sure enough, we do see that now we have a resource here and we have our storage account. We can click into it. And again, all these options that you see here is a whole nother video, so I'm not going to cover that right now, but we can see some of the basic things such as the location that we passed is proper and we deployed it to that, as well as some of the settings like local redundant and the account kind storage free too. So there you go. Alright, so I think at this point we're feeling a little bit more comfortable with deployments and using Azure Powershell commands to deploy. We've also deployed our first resource. And now we want to take it one step further and make it reusable by using parameters. What I mean by that is if you look at line 8 over here, it's actually giving a hard-coded storage account name. So this template, if we were to try to reuse it, we'd have to always manually come in here and change this name. And while that does work for smaller teams, if you were to work in a larger company or a larger team and there's going to be multiple users using it across, that might be one of those details that get skipped on a frequent basis. And also, it's just not a clean way to do it. And on that note, we're going to make a small addition to this template that will allow us to pass an additional parameter when we're calling the Azure module so that we can provide a value for line 8 on runtime of that command instead of having it hard-coded inside the template. So just like before, you can either go to the GitHub link inside the video description and just copy exactly what you see here for this link, which will be laid out just in case you want to pause it. It's under this path. Otherwise, I'm going to type it out anyways and try to explain some things as I'm doing it, and you can feel free to pause at the end just to be able to type it up yourself. Alright, so going back to the template, right under line 3, or right after the content version, we're going to make a new object here, and this is going to be called parameters. Notice how if you have the extension, it already starts using IntelliSense to help you and guide your path. Look at that. This is why I highly recommend using Visual Studio Code as well as this extension, because it just makes it so much easier. Anyways, that being said, once we have a new object created here, we're going to call this storage name. And this is going to be obviously the variable or parameter that's going to receive the name of the storage account here on now currently line 13. And from here inside the storage name variable, we're going to add some restrictions to it, or some defining properties rather. The first thing is we're going to dictate what type it is, and the type will be obviously a string. And then, as you saw in the earlier part of the video when I thought I was making a mistake because of the lowercase letters, the fact that the name can only receive lowercase letters, it also had an issue where they have a minimum and maximum length. So we're going to dictate that and force it here to make sure that no one tries to pass along a name that's either too short or too long, which would end up causing a hiccup when you're actually trying to deploy. So let's just catch that before it even becomes an issue. Now that we have that added in there, there's really only one change left to make. The settings of the storage account itself, we will leave everything exactly the same except for one thing. The current line of 15, where we pass in a hard-coded name, will be changed to be using this. So we're going to say from our parameters, make sure that we choose storage name. And you see how the auto fills like that, or use IntelliSense. So there you go. So now we're good. So now the assumption of what should happen is that when we're calling this command like we were before, we're going to have an additional parameter of which is called storage name, in which at that time we can give the storage name, and thereby making this template highly reusable, because we no longer need to go over here and change this template. We only need to change it when we're actually calling the deployment of that template. Okay, so now we're going to adjust the command that we were using to deploy earlier. So again, as you saw earlier, the only things that we cared about was the name of the deployment, the resource group name, and then the path to the deployment file itself. So one thing that I'm doing here is I'm going to give it a new deployment name. Where's the cursor? Okay. And I'm going to call this edit parameters, right? And then we're going to add an additional parameter here, which is going to be called storage name. And then obviously inside this string is where you would add the name of your storage account. So for this example, what did I call the original one? Either way, I'll just call this testing parameters storage YouTube 2021. That should be unique enough. So let me go ahead. Oh, you can feel free to pause it to make sure you have the same thing. Or what I'm thinking is I'm actually going to make a text file inside the GitHub link that will have these commands in there. So it's much easier for you to just copy and paste that, since you're already most likely going to be copy and pasting these templates. All right, so right before we deploy it, let's just review one more time what we expect to see here. One thing is that we expect to see a brand new storage account as well as an additional deployment that will be listed under the deployments tab over here. Alright, so that being said, let's go ahead and run it. The reason why I'm getting this is I keep forgetting to save this. In case you're using Visual Studio Code, when you have this white circle, it means you didn't save it. So now we can save it, and let's run it. Oh, look at that. So it worked out. It was a happy little accident. I didn't even mean to exceed the character count. So let's go ahead and change this. And I think if we just remove this ST part, we should be good to go. Okay, so let's see what went wrong here. Okay, so it looks like I'm not learning from my own lessons. In the event that I'm within the character range, I keep adding capital characters to it. So that might be another thing that we want to enforce in some way. But for the sake of this video and moving forward, I'm just going to make everything lowercase. Okay, so let's go back to the portal and let us refresh this page. And we see that the deployment name of added parameters is successful. If we go to deployment details, we see that it deployed a new storage account. And now let's just verify that by going back to overview over here. And we do indeed see two storage accounts. So we're able to do it through a reusable template. All right, so we had successful deployment. However, we're not completely finished with this portion. So while we're able to pass a parameter in here and add it to the command when we're deploying, we might want to have more flexibility, but also restrictions in that. Say you have some variable that's important that you want to have a limited number of values so that whether it's you or another team member, there's less likely chance of a mistake being made, such as, for example, maybe picking a region. Um, there's a limited number of regions, so you don't want somebody to type in something that doesn't make sense, only for them to get to the deployment and be like, oh, there's an issue with this deployment because the region doesn't exist. Let's just catch those things before we even get to that, right? So one way you might be able to do that is create an additional parameter and have it have default value and then also a preset list of values that you can choose from, so that when you're deploying it, you can either just let it be the default or explicitly choose from the list which of those options are available for you to deploy and are valid, so that it requires less know-how and knowledge for people who are deploying it. And it also helps make sure that more issues are caught early on, in that, we won't have to deploy something that's not valid to begin with. Okay, so we have a slightly updated template. For this example, inside the GitHub, I changed the name to be deployment rg underscore with SKU, that JSON. So if you take a look at this folder, we see that we have both of these. Anyways, that being said, there's two things that we've added here. So you see that we've added another parameter called storage SKU. It's a string. It has a default value. It also has a allowed preset that you can put for value. And then down here at line 34, line 32, similar to how we did for the name of the storage account, we're giving the option to choose from the parameters, or use a parameter, and we're going to pick which parameter we want to use for the SKU. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this edit. So since we're adding another parameter after the storage name parameter, we're going to add a comma here, and then we're going to give a name of a new parameter. In this case, it's going to be storage SKU. And just like always, the extension already knows what we're trying to do. So we're going to start by dictating the type, which again will be a string. We're going to have a default value, of which, again, IntelliSense already knows what we're trying to do. So really, really can't stress enough how important it is to have that extension. And since this is a lengthy piece, I highly recommend you go to the GitHub and actually follow along from there, as opposed to just watching me type it out here, since the font is small and I can't zoom in anyways. So okay, so under allowed values, we're going to create a list of things that are valid. We're going to have standard LRS, and let's just, for the sake of making it easier, just add a couple of these in here. Should have probably pasted the comma as well. GRS, RAGRS, ZRS, LRS Premium. Premium ZRS. Standard GZRS, and finally standard RAGZRS. And there you go. So we have that added in there. And let's see. The only other thing we need to do is go down to the SKU over here at line 31. Okay, so let's go over here and just swap it out, similar to how we did for up top. So we have parameters, IntelliSense already knows once again what we're trying to do. And now we have the option to pick storage name with storage SKU, in this case, storage SKU. And now our template is complete. Don't forget to save it. Okay, so we're going to deploy it twice. The reason why we're going to do it twice is first time we're going to deploy it just to make sure it's coming up with the default value of standard LRS. The second time we're going to pick another option. So let's go ahead over here, back to our notepad, update this. I forgot what it was called. Whatever, it doesn't hurt to create a new one here anyways. Call it 2020, just add a 20 in there. Added parameters, width, SKU 1. Okay, and that should be good. So copy that command in here. Let's get rid of this one. I don't learn my lesson. Get rid of these capital letters. I don't know why I keep doing it. Alright, so it's deploying. So we're back in the Azure Portal window. If we go to deployments, we see that it's successful. We can see the deployment details. It's been created. Let's go back over here. We'll go to overview. I'm sure if we refresh this. Oh, did we give it the same name? Maybe we did. I forgot. I thought I changed the name. Testing parameters 2001. So yeah, it should be a new one. So it's definitely here. I wonder what happened. Why is it not showing up over here? Okay, so it must have just been some delay. But yeah, there it is with the extra 20 in the front. And if we look at the settings, the SKU is locally redundant storage, or LRS. Okay, so now this time we're going to choose another SKU value from our list. So in order to do that, just like we did for the storage name, we're going to say that yes, we're going to use a storage SKU parameter, and then we're going to pass a value over here. In this case, we're going to choose, for example, GRS, just the next guy in line. So again, these commands will be in another text file inside the GitHub, or you could just pause the screen and type it out yourself to make sure you have the same. Okay, so let's go over here and let us deploy it. So it's deploying. Okay, so let's go back to the portal. We'll go to deployments. I think I gave it the same name by accident. I forgot to update the name. It was supposed to say SKU 2, but it's okay. So let's go ahead and go over here. We see that it changed from LRS, local redundant, to geo redundant, GRS. So it kind of worked out because you can see that if you already had a deployment, it'll overwrite that current deployment with the same one. And obviously, you can do it what I did earlier too, where you just deploy a completely new resource anyways. So there's one more thing I want to show you. If we expand this and we go to the log, we see that, yes, we were able to redeploy it with the standard GRS since we passed it in there. But I don't know if you can see it, but let me just open up this notepad. So we're going to change this to something that's not in our allowed list. So we're going to change this to code doge, for example, and we'll copy this, right? Let's get rid of this. And what we're going to try to do is see what happens if you send something that's not a part of the allowed list. So we see here it gives a message saying that the provided value is not, good to go. and then it lists which values you can choose from. So you see the importance and the value in adding parameters, and in this case, having the power to even control what parameters values would be valid to use. Okay, so before we continue, let's make it a habit to clean up garbage resources that are for a test or sandbox environment. So in this case, let's go ahead and just select over here. In case you don't know how to delete it, do not click on delete resource group. Depending on how your organization is set up, you might have super admin rights and are able to delete a resource group. Do not do that, please. The proper delete button is over here for these resources. And if you click on that, it's going to give you a prompt that you have to be absolutely sure you want to delete those. And if you hit yes and you delete it, over here on this notification box, it will tell you that it's executing the delete. Okay. And on the deployments. All right, so before we move on to the next section, which is adding additional functions into your template, let's just do one thing since we cleared the resources inside the resource group, and we saw that, it's been executed and it deleted all 3 items. You may want to, for whatever reason, be able to check the, the log to make sure that's the case. If you want to do that, you can hover over here to activity log, give it a second to load up. Maybe more like a minute or 2.
20 minutes later.
I'm thinking maybe the time span is not valid. So let's increase this to 24 hours.
A few moments later.
There you go. So if you look at this, our activity log, you can see from the moment we just started and we started creating these storage accounts, creating these deployments, and then the last thing that we did here is actually delete all of these storage accounts. Alright, so now we're ready to work on the functions. And believe it or not, you've actually worked on the functions. The reason being, when we made these changes inside the template so that it's reading from your parameter list, such as storage SKU or your storage name, that's actually implementing a function. And per Microsoft's explanation and description, essentially, functions add flexibility to your template by dynamically getting values during deployment. Alright, to further hammer home the idea of using functions, we're going to add another parameter. And again, if you need to follow along, as always, the video description has the GitHub links. This one will be under YouTube Solution Azure ARM for add functions under the Powershell. Right, and pretty much the only thing we're adding is this location parameter, and then we'll update this over here on line 34. Okay, so as stated, let's go back to our deployment rg.json template, and right after storage SKU, once again, we're going to add another parameter, so let's do comma. In this case, we're going to call it location. IntelliSense comes in clutch, and if we type in type, we can say it's a string. And then finally, its default value. And over here, we're going to say resource group dot parentheses dot location. Let's put that in quotes over here. Sorry about that. So we see that it is now valid. And then finally, the only other change is going down over here. We've been hard coding it to be East US. And now, just like before, we're going to make it so that it takes it from the parameters and we're taking the location. Alright, so now let's go ahead and create this command. Again, you can find inside the GitHub links for this portion, you can find a separate command text file that will have not only a template version of these commands, but also an example. So anyways, going on that, the name of this deployment we're going to change, and we're going to say added functions. Resource group name stays the same, template file stays the same for now. Storage name, we deleted everything anyways, but we'll just call this 2021 just to make it simple, making sure everything's lowercase this time. Storage SKU, let's just use the default moving forward. Okay, so you can see this is essentially the base command that we would be using. Um, Looks like my window crashed, so let me just create a new terminal. In case you didn't know, just go to terminal, new terminal, and you're good to go. So let's see what's going on here. So we copy this, we paste that. So let's go ahead and run it. So what we expect to see here, essentially, from the deployment, is that if you notice, we've been deploying directly to US East, but now what these parameters are saying is that deploy to the location in which your resource group was created. So what that means is that we might have had our storage account created in like West US, but we've been explicitly stating to create it inside East US. But now that a resource group is in West US, we're saying essentially the uh, storage account will be deployed in West US. Okay, so here we are back in Azure Portal. Let's just refresh this. We see that the storage account is created. The location is East US, and the reason for that is because our resource group just so happens to be East US. But you know, you get the idea. If this was West US, then this would have been West US now. Whereas before, if this was West US, we were explicitly stating East US. Alright, so now we're ready to add variables on top of functions, on top of everything else we've done for these templates so far. Okay, so essentially the change that we're going to make is we're going to swap out the storage name with another parameter called storage prefix. And then we are going to add a variable over here of which is called unique storage name, which will concatenate the storage prefix that we will pass along via command, and then by default take unique string value, which is going to be the resource group.id. Okay, so it auto appends. Obviously, you can string together multiple variables as well if you wanted to. Okay, so the first thing we want to do as a change is we want to change the storage name to storage prefix. Everything else we can keep, but we don't want to max out the length to 24 since that's the maximum we could take. After that, right after this portion for parameters and before the resources portion, we're going to add variables over here. And within here, we will create a new storage name or a new variable in here. And then from here, what we're going to say is concat parameters. And then inside over here, we're going to say, oops, sorry. Should be like this. Let's not break the flow. We're going to say it's storage prefix. And then we're going to smash that up with something else called unique string resource group .id. And finally, we're going to go to the bottom over here, and we're simply just going to change this from parameters to variables. Variables, and then change it to unique storage name. We must have missed something here. The comma, yes. Okay. So that checks out. So we have the storage prefix, the variable, unique storage name, which is a concatenation of something we're going to send via the command of storage prefix combined by the resource group ID. And then later on the resources for name, it will know to take this variable unique storage name. Okay, so let's go ahead and build the command, right? So everything stays the same so far. Added functions, we'll change this to added variables for the deployment name. Resource group is the same, template file is the same. Storage name no longer exists. We removed that. So this should change to storage prefix. As I said, this is what we're going to pass along. And inside here, we could just call it anything. Codage, for example, over here. Okay, now we have that, and we can paste it inside here. That's because I keep forgetting to save it. And on top of that, I just realized that this has capital letters. So let's make sure that is all lowercase. Copy that, paste that, and let's run that. Okay, so we're inside the portal. Let's check the deployments. As always, we see the deployment name show up. The deployment details show you that the resource name is the prefix that we sent, which was code Doge, and then the resource group ID over here that we see. So there we go. We've used a variable successfully. Alright, so the next thing we want to cover is adding outputs to your template. What we mean by that is you may want to deploy your template and deploy your resource and then have certain information outputted inside the log for you to be able to consume in some way or form, or just to have useful information. Okay, so just like before, you can go to GitHub and copy and paste the schema for the template, or you can just pause the screen and follow along as I type it out next. But essentially, this is the only new addition that we're going to add in here, which is going to be this output section at the bottom of the template. Okay, so let's return to Visual Studio Code, and right after resources over here, we're going to make a comma, and then as we do the double quotes, you already see a couple options come out from IntelliSense. In this case, we're going to pick outputs, and then we have the braces, and we're going to say storage endpoint. Another brace. Let's get rid of this. Slash type, and it's going to be an object followed by the value, which will be reference variables unique storage name, and after the second parentheses, we're going to put dot primary endpoints. So let's just make sure that checks out, and let's put this in quotes. So it should look a little something like that. Okay, so let's go back over here, and for the thousandth time, there will be a separate text file that has the commands that we use inside this video for this portion inside the GitHub. Otherwise, you could just pause and follow along here. But here we're going to change the deployment name to be added outputs. Resource group same, template file same, storage prefix same. So everything here should be the same. So let's go over here and open a new terminal window and just paste this command in. Okay, so we have it. Let's run it. And it's saying the path doesn't exist, and that is as expected. The reason why is, as I was filming this video, I kind of changed the path of where I was putting the files. So it used to just be YouTube Solutions and then Azure ARM, and then it would have the folder structure of 1, 2, 3, whatever of the modules that we're going over. But I put all of those modules inside the separate folder over here, and that's actually throwing it off. So that's fine. All we need to do here is just adjust that line over here to this, and that should check out. And FYI, the reason I did that is because I plan to make more videos covering ARM templates, and I just think it'll be a better idea to divvy it up now into a different folder so that the links will still be relevant and I don't need to change the links. So anyways, we see that the deployment was successful. Let's maximize this. We see the deployment was successful. Um, and more importantly, we see that there's a new column over here of outputs, and it's giving us the storage endpoints. So I'll go to Portal in a second to show you, but it's giving us a web blob queue table file, all of these endpoints for that storage account. Okay, so we're back in the portal, and in case you're wondering what we meant by those endpoints, if you go to the storage account, we have the endpoint for the storage account itself, but if you see there's different kinds of services inside of it, such as blob service, file service, queue service, table service, whatever, what have you. And if you navigate in this menu on the side over here to endpoints, you see that we have different endpoints depending on which service we're trying to target. So that output was actually outputting these endpoints. All right, so the next topic we're going to cover here is how to manually create a resource and then export that resource as a template. Okay, so why might we want to do this? First and foremost, when you're creating some new templates, you may not be familiar following along with IntelliSense using the ARM extension in Visual Studio Code on how to build your resource out. So one of the things that I do frequently is I will manually create the resource that I want to make a template for, and then export that template. And from the exported template, you can actually extract key resource or key details about that resource and property that you can now extract and put into your base template now. And then you can, parameterize or variabilize your template, and now you have your own ARM template for that instead of having to manually create it. All right, so to begin, to create a resource manually, in case you're not aware, you can click on Create over here. Under Search and Services, you can type in whatever you want. In this case, we're going to create an app service plan. We type that in, we see it show up. We click on Create, and then we have a couple options here. Choose the subscription you want it to be under, the resource group that you want to provision it into, the name, which we will call Test U2 2021 Plan. Choose the operating system, choose the region, and most importantly for our case, choose the SKU size. In this case, we don't need anything expensive. Let's see if we can get anything even cheaper than that. Probably this should, oh, it's free. I can't believe I'm looking for something cheaper than free. Okay, so optionally you can just click on review and create. You can click on next for additional features like tags, but for this example, we're just going to keep it nice and simple. We'll just click on review and create. So now it'll actually start provisioning your resource, and this is a manual way of provisioning resources. This is the whole reason why we're creating ARM templates, so that we can automate it through code or infrastructure as code. So it's got the review set up. Let us go ahead and create it. It's initializing the deployment. In case you're new to Azure, you can always click on this notification bell, and it'll always tell you what things and what actions are going on. So I'm probably going to cut to a later part into the video because it's going to take some time for the deployment to happen. Okay, so it's deployed. I just noticed in my Genius, I happen to call it Test YT 2021 Plam, but it's okay. Either way, what we can do is we have a ready status. So the app service plan is completed. It is for Linux. And if you go down all the way over here under automation, export template, you will see that we have all the key values that we need for this, in that we have a set of parameters here, and it's taking the default value, and then the resources, and over here it's telling you all the details based on what we chose. So you can see how we can easily copy and paste this and put it to our own template, which is exactly what we're going to end up doing right now. FYI, you are able to not just copy and paste, but you can straight up just download it yourself too. Okay, so if you go to the GitHub, you can check out this path. We have exported template. This is an example of what the exported template looks like, straight from that resource that we just created. You see it has this template and its own parameter set. And then otherwise, you can go inside PowerShell and you can check out what we're going to add into our script right now, or our template right now, which is essentially we're going to be adding this app service plan value over here, and then finally adding the actual resource itself inside the resources list. Okay, so let's make the updates to the template. Again, I highly suggest you go to the GitHub link and just copy and paste it as you need to. But otherwise, you can follow along here. So after location, we're going to add a new value over here. We're going to call it app service plan name. And yes, it already knows. So we're going to say type, it is a string. And then after that, we're going to provide a default value of which we will call it example plan. Okay, so obviously this could also technically be a variable in the same sense that we did it for Unix storage name, but we'll stick to the way the documentation is done just for simplicity. Okay, so the next thing that we want to copy is if we go over here inside the template, which is also on GitHub, you can go over here in resources and just copy this entire portion over here. So what I'm doing here is actually I'm grabbing it from the exported template from Portal. You can alternatively just grab it from the GitHub and copy it, paste it one for one. But either way, we want to go to resources afterwards, add a comma, and then add this, whoops, add this in here like this. And we see that we have everything set up. The one difference from doing that copy and paste method is that, we called it server farms underscore testyt 2021 plem underscore name. But in this case, we're creating a new parameter. So we want to copy and paste this app service plan parameter and overwrite what we have here. And now it should be a valid template. So now we have to update the command for deployments. In this case, we'll say using exported template. Everything else can stay the same. So let's copy and paste that, and let's paste it inside here and run it. Okay, so let's go. Let's execute it. It is saying there's an error because this. Okay. This is because I happen to pick a free resource. So if you look at the original documentation provided by Microsoft to give some other provisioning, I will have that other provisioning inside the GitHub base template example, but I also have a copy of this one in case you're using a free account. So pretty much all I have to do is I would have to delete the current existing free app service plan, and then I should be able to deploy that. So I'm going to do just that. Okay, so here we are back inside the portal. Let's go ahead and actually just delete this plan so that we can use the free tier again. So as I stated before, it is deleting it. It should be gone. Let's go ahead and check. Let's just refresh this once. Okay, so it might be taking a little bit longer. It'll probably get picked up soon. There it is. Okay, so now we should be able to deploy. Okay, so we're back inside Visual Studio Code. Let's give that another go. And we see this time it's taking a little while longer, which usually hints that it's trying to deploy. So at least we're not getting that same error about the fact that we can only have one free tier app service plan in existence at a time. So I'm assuming that this will probably complete.
2 very boring minutes later.
Might as well increase it, maximize it. There you go. So it looks like it was a successful deployment, and we'll go inside the portal to confirm. Okay, so we're back inside the portal. Let us refresh this resource group, and bam, example plan on their app service plan is right there. And it is using the F1 tier, the free tier. That's the best tier, man. So we are good to go. And again, in case you missed it, you can always go to export template and you can always get a sample of what you're looking at. And what I was mentioning earlier is that if you actually look at the GitHub link for this one, it will actually be using a different tier, the B1 Basic, right? You can feel free to change this up to the F1 in case you're worried about running a bill. If not, if you go back to GitHub over here, and not this one. If you go to the example export template, right over here, we use the free tier, so you can just copy and paste this free tier value instead of the B1 Basic. Alright, now it's time to explore something called Azure Quickstart Templates. So if you go to this URL, azure.microsoft.com, resources slash templates, you'll see that you can search for multiple different kinds of templates that are made either by Microsoft or other creators that are on the Microsoft market. And you can essentially pick one and just exactly as it sounds, Quickstart, it's a preset template that you can just inject and deploy. Okay, so per Microsoft's documentation, we'll follow along and we'll just start by going to the search bar and typing a deploy a. Okay, so it already understands that we want to do something. Deploy a basic Linux web app. Okay, so if we do that, we have one option over here. We click on this, and over here we see two options. If you click on Deploy to Azure, it will actually open up Azure Portal, and based on whoever's logged in, whoever you're logged in as, it will try to open up that deployment page. So let's go ahead and click on that for one. Alternatively, obviously, if you click on Browse on GitHub, it will just open GitHub. And if you were to go to Azure Deploy.json, you would see the template that is going to be trying to deploy. Alternatively, since we clicked on deploy through Azure, as you can see, it opened up my portal.azure and it's trying to deploy the template that was shared. Okay, so let's start by going to the GitHub link so that we can actually make the additions that we need for this portion. So pretty much some of the only things that we're going to be adding here are sections for the web app name, as you can see here, as well as a Linux version here. And then at the bottom, we're going to obviously add the resource of actual web application itself over here. We're using the parameters and variables that we stated earlier above. Okay, so we're back here in Visual Studio Code. Just keep in mind the GitHub link was using the base one from the documentation, which is using like basic plan, whereas we're using free tier here. So just slight difference. Both versions, both the one that we're editing here inside the video, as well as the basic one from the documentation, will be there available on GitHub. So that being said, let's go ahead and just add two values based on the changes here. Right after app service plan, we're going to add a comma here. We're going to add a new value here, which is going to be called web app name. And it's going to be another object. It's going to be of type string that we're going to pass over here. Let's use IntelliSense. And then for metadata, we are going to say description. Let's keep it simple, just based on the base name of resource for web app. Okay, so there we are finished with that. And they have one more value that we're going to add here, which is a minimum length of 2 here. And then after this, we're going to create one more. which will be Linux version. Okay. Yes, it's an object. It will be of type string. And we'll give a default value here. It will be PHP 7.0. And for metadata, we're just going to have a description. And here we will say the runtime stack of current web app. Okay. So once we have that, we're going to add one new variable over here. So let's do a comma after unique storage name. And here we will have web app portal name. Okay, so over here we're going to add this new variable. So let's just start by copying and pasting this line above, or obviously you can copy and paste it from GitHub. One thing to change here is instead of storage prefix, we're going to change this to be the web app name. Otherwise, we are good to go. Okay, so now that we have these variables in place, let's go to the list of resources and actually add a new resource. So after our app service plan resource that we added here, let's go ahead and add a new piece. Here you can type in Microsoft.web/sites. Forgot the brackets. This is why it's so much easier for you to just actually copy and paste it from GitHub. Okay. Alright. So, you know what? Actually, that's exactly what I'm going to do. If you don't have access to GitHub for whatever reason, you can just feel free to pause it right here, right now. Otherwise, I think it would just be easier to do it this way. There you go. And let's just fix this up a little bit. Let's put this on a new line, put this on a new line. Okay. Okay. So let's just double check to make sure everything is good here. Okay. So we have app service plan name over here. We have this web app portal name over here. And we have that the name will be taken from web app portal name. Okay. So I think we're good. Alright, so now let's go ahead and create the command. Another reminder, you can always look at the GitHub for the command.txt that will have a list of all these commands. So anyways, that being said, really we're just going to add one new parameter here, right, which is called web app name, and we're just going to call it test app demo, right? So you can pause it or look at the GitHub, and over here we shall create a new terminal. Simply paste it in here. Ooh, one thing, let's change this label to be added quickstart template. Okay, so copy that, copy this, paste over it, and we should be good to run it. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. All right. So it looks like it failed, and it's saying it cannot find server farm with name example plan. So let's go ahead and see what's up. So here we are back at the portal. We see that we have example plan, app service plan in existence, and it's under central US. So over here we can go to edit quick start template deployment and double check to see if it gives any more info. and it gives us the same information. So with that being said, let's go back one. Let's go back to overview. Um, I think I know what the issue is. Okay, so we are back inside Visual Code, and I think the issue is that if you take a closer look, it gives us the information that it's trying to deploy it to East US location for the actual resource, whereas our app service plan happened to be deployed to Central US for whatever reason. So what we could do hypothetically is we can go over here and append to this the location and give Central US. However, if we were to do this approach, we would have to comment out some of these storage account values, or some of the other values that we're trying to deploy. Because as you can see, with exception to this one where for whatever reason it was hard coded in to take Central US, all the other ones are taking the location based on the parameter. So, we can comment these out and then redeploy it so that it's inside Central US for the resource to match the app service plan. Or you can simply go to the resource group, delete the Central US app service plan, and then redeploy it properly, being in the East US. And essentially, we're going to swap out these values and put it over here so that it's in the same uniform approach. Okay, so let's start by going back to Azure Portal. Let's select this app service plan and let us delete it, right? We're just gonna hit yes and be done with it. Okay, so now we've returned to Visual Studio, right? So what we're going to do is essentially just take this line anywhere where it has this parameter, where it's going to take it from the parameter list and replace it over this part over here. Hopefully you won't have to do any of this because I will append it and update it inside the GitHub link. But in case you do happen to have the same or similar issue, at least you now know how to resolve this issue. Okay, so we save that. So now it's going to take the resource group's location, or whatever location that we're going to pass through if we do it this way, and it should deploy it just fine. So let's go over here. We can remove that part and we should be able to deploy it again. And now it should redeploy the app service plan and then the quick start deployment. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it. And it might take a while because it needs to redeploy the ASP on their East US and then deploy the new resource that we added from the quick start template. And obviously, again, if you took it straight from the GitHub, by the time you see this video, this part would already have been fixed up inside the repo. But in the event that you happen to follow as I'm typing or copy and pasting, then you probably had the same issue, so this will at least show the resolution. Also, I just like to show potential issues so that you can feel more comfortable with resolving it if you happen to see the same thing yourself. Okay, so here we are back inside the resource group after deployment. Let's go ahead and refresh it. Not sure what just happened right there. It looks like the ASP went missing, but there might be some issue here. Anyways, let's go ahead and check out the deployment. As far as the deployment goes, it looks like the storage account was deployed, app service was deployed, and then the actual resource itself was also deployed here. So I'm curious to go back here and refresh it one more time. It looks like it's already there, so it must have been some weird UI issue. But you do see that we have now resolved the issue that it is in the same resource group location. And that's why we were able to now deploy the app service, because it has to be obviously in the same location. Alright, so now that's completed, let's move on to adding tags. Long story short, the way I would best summarize the use of tags is that it makes it easy to quickly identify where a resource belongs and what their use is. For example, over here inside the resource group, we see that not only can we add tags to the resource group, but if we were to click on this newly deployed app service, for example, we can also add tags in here. So say that this resource group was used for, I don't know, for example, this was the dev environment, and we might want to look up this app service. We can also add dev as a tag here, because in the event that we had a similar naming schema instead of this extra bit that's being added at the end, say that it was just test app demo, whether it's this resource group, which is for dev, or another one that's for QA or UAT. You might see this come up multiple times, but it might be a little bit confusing to find out where it belongs to. But tags will help you easily identify that yes, this particular resource belongs to this particular resource group or environment or some logical grouping. Okay, so as always, you can start by going to GitHub. You can click on deployment group deployment RG for the base template that's provided by Microsoft, or alternatively, you can click on the one underscore free tier, which is the one that I'm going to be editing during this video. The only difference really is that I'm using a free tier, and this might be very useful for people who don't have a paid subscription. I happen to have a MPN subscription, so I have $100 credit to use. So anyways, take your pick. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Code. And I highly recommend that you just add it straight from or copy and paste it from GitHub. However, if you don't have that luxury, you just want to follow along, what we're going to do is we're going to come here right after Linux FX version, do a comma here, and we're just going to add a new resource tags. It's an object. It is an object. And then we're going to give a default value. In this case, be another object. And in here, we're going to define some tags over here. So we're going to have environment, for example, and it's going to be dev. And then for project, we're going to have another one. So tutorial. Okay. So other than that, all we have to do now is essentially go down to each of these resources, and now we're going to add a new section in which we're going to pass the tags in here. So if we go over here, you see that IntelliSense automatically picks up that we're trying to add tags here, and we can just do this. And in the same light that we've done everything else, such as location, you can just type in square brackets, parameters, and then resource tags, as you can see. Okay, and add this comma at the end. So what you can do now, that you have this completed line for tags, you can copy it and add it for every resource we're about to deploy. In this case, we could just do it at the location every time. And that's pretty much the only change we have to do. The reason why we're doing this, it's, again, we know that this resource group is going to have these tags, and every resource under it now will have those those tags. So it's very easy to identify where these resources belong. Okay, so this is essentially the command that we're going to pass. It's actually the same as we did before. The only difference is I'm going to be changing the deployment name. Okay, and again, GitHub, there will be a text file that has all the commands that we're using. So once you have that, you can paste it into your terminal and you can run it. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and hit enter and start the deployment. Okay, so let's look at the log. It looks like it was successful. It's deployed everything with these resource tags. So when we go to Portal, we should see the same resources, but they should have tags added to them now. Okay, so here we are inside the portal. Let's go ahead and start by checking this resource over here. Sure enough, we do see that there are two tags now: dev, environment is dev, and the project tutorial. So if we go back here, let's just check the app service now, environment and tutorial. Same, I'm sure, for the app service plan, and obviously the last resource, the other storage account that we have here. This is probably because I don't even think I'm mentioning this inside the code. This was probably made earlier in the video, but not added into the template, so that's an exception. So that just checks out that yeah, it's only going to add it to the ones inside the template, obviously. Okay, so we're on to the final part of this video, which is using a parameter file. So you can go to GitHub and just click on, folder 10, and you see that not only do we have the deployment RG and the free tier.json, but now we have two parameter files, dev and prod. Obviously, the commands text file will also have the updated commands we're going to use for the next portion. So you can start here. Otherwise, you can stay tuned as I type it all out. Alright, so in terms of using these parameter files, we don't need to update anything inside our base template, or in this case, deployment rg.json. All we have to do is simply create these two parameter files that you see on the left over here. Okay, so if you take a close look, let's just do a comparison. So you could right click on it, select for compare, and then right click on this, compare with selected. If you take a look, the left being the default template, the right being the parameter file, you can actually see that the parameter file has different values, but the same keys, if you will, for these parameters that we're going to send, such as storage prefix, storage SKU, location, app service plan, web app name. Well, doesn't have Linux FX version, but resource tags. And these are all just taken from the default Microsoft template that they gave. You can obviously feel free to change it up as you like. Okay, so now that being said, since we have the parameter files, the only thing we need to change really is the command that we're going to send. So since the parameter file already has values such as storage prefix, web app name, and whatever else you might have added, let's just remove these parameters. And then the next thing you have to do is just add a new parameter called template parameter file. And then here you would add the path to the desired parameter file you want to deploy. So in this case, if you want to deploy the parameter file for dev, then pass that path over here. So we'll go over here, copy the path, paste it in over here. Okay, so we have this path ready, and now we are ready to actually deploy. So once again, all that we're really doing here is we're changing we're passing the deployment name, which I should actually change to add parameters dev deploy, which is fine. Resource group name, template file. So those past three things are what we've always been passing, and then the new addition is just the template parameter file. So before we deploy, I just want to let you know that between the last showing of this resource group, I actually did delete those app services and app service plans, mainly because in the tutorial that I'm using the free tier, and you will get a complaint about trying to redeploy additional app services under our app service plan, or having additional app service plans under the free tier. So for me, I had to delete it. If you follow the Microsoft version where they use a basic plan, you shouldn't have that restriction, but obviously you will have to pay for the resource. Okay, so we're back inside Visual Code. So let's run the command now.
2,000 years later.
Okay, so let's check the log. It looks like it was successful. Seems to have deployed everything. It used clearly. Well, actually no, we had dev and tutorial as our tags here as well. So, okay. Anyways, we'll check inside the portal to make sure everything has been deployed properly using parameters. Okay, so here we are in portal. Let's give this a nice little refresh. And sure enough, we can see that, based on the configuration settings that are in that parameter file, we have a new app service deployed, app service plan as well, and then a storage account as well. So let's just check to see. They also had the same tags of dev and tutorial. So yeah, looks like we were able to deploy using a parameter file. Alright, so the last part of this parameters exercise is that we're supposed to use a different parameter file for deploying to prod. So in this case, we will take a look at over here, and we see that, first of all, we had all of these values over here, dev store, dev plan, dev app, whatever. Over here, we see that we have different names for all of these things. Most importantly, we can use these resource tags to understand quickly that yes, this is a production environment, but the project is still this tutorial project. And FYI, I'm going to remove these for the next clip, so in case you're wondering why they're not there anymore. Alright, so to invoke the prod parameter file, we actually need a different resource group because we're trying to say each resource group is a different environment. So this one that we have over here, TestRG 2021 YT, is technically our dev. Um, so if we go over here to the portal and we go to resource groups, we see that we only have the one resource group available. Um, so you could manually create a new resource group here, but since we're doing it through PowerShell, why don't we just do it through PowerShell? So the next things we're going to do is we're going to create a new resource group that's supposed to represent a production environment, and then run the prod parameter file to deploy our resources quickly. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Code. Let's clear our terminal. And first thing we're going to do here is we're going to use Azure new hyphen AZ resource group followed by name and then the name of your prod resource group. So we're just going to call it prod resource group YT 2021 and then the location. In this case, we will just say it's West US to further differentiate that yes, it's a different environment altogether. So we see that the production resource group is created. So let's go to portal and verify. Okay, so we're inside the portal. Let's give a nice little refresh on the resource group. It might just take a while. There it is. So we have this second resource group created. It's under West US, just like we dictated, and it has no resources yet. Okay, so now to build the command. If you noticed earlier, we were targeting the dev.json and then our test RG 2021, which is our dev environment or dev resource group. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to append this, not append it, update it to match our prod resource group. Let's change the name of this deployment to prod deploy. And let us change this to match the prod JSON file. Okay, so let's copy that and paste it over here and let's run it. Okay, so it says the deployment name is at parameters prod deploy. It is succeeded, and let's check inside the portal to confirm. Okay, so here we are in our prod resource group. Let's give it a nice little refresh. And sure enough, we have the values of the prod template as we saw. And just to confirm, we should see if we go to any of these resources that the environment tag says production. Alright, so that pretty much sums up this intro tutorial video for ARM templates. And again, use the Microsoft documentation with adding a few extra little pieces here and there to give extra knowledge. Just to help get a base. Moving forward, future videos will probably reference this first tutorial video so that you're already acclimated to using ARM templates. As we go forward, we can continue to understand how we can actually use the pipeline to help automate some of your ARM template deployments, as well as ARM templates for other resources that might be a bit more complex or need some explanation. So anyways, that's things that are to come. This is the end of this video unofficially. Other than that, if you finished it to the end and you found it helpful and that you learned something, please do subscribe and feel free to add me on Twitter. It would be really helpful to get some support to get the channel to continue to grow. You can find all those details inside the video description. Otherwise, continue your path in learning, and I wish all of you the best.